All right. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Greetings from Tucson, Arizona. I bet it's snowing everywhere else in the country except here. This is Attila Vakeny from the Authors Academy. And today we have a great topic and interview lined up about selling 1,000 books over the holidays. And I want to welcome all the new members who just recently joined the Academy and just let you know that this call is being recorded, as all of our Authors Academy calls are. And all of the recordings of the past few years are all available 24/7 to members inside the Academy. And we'll start the call in just a minute. We're just going to make sure that everybody's on the line. Today we'll be talking to James D. Best, Authors Academy member and one of Wheatmark's best-selling authors. Now let me make sure we've got both Jim and Grael on the line. Jim, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
All right. How about you, Grael?
I sure am, Attila. Thanks.
Okay. Well, here is Grael Norton, Senior Faculty at the Authors Academy.
Well, thanks, Attila, and hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Authors Academy teleseminar, How to Sell 1,000 Books This Holiday Season. As Attila mentioned, I'm Grael Norton, Senior Faculty Member of the Authors Academy, and I'm super excited to be here with you today as we'll be talking with one of Wheatmark's most prolific and successful authors, Jim Best. Jim, welcome to the Academy.
Thank you.
How's the weather out there today? As Attila rubbed it in, it is quite lovely out here in Tucson. It's a bright, sunny day. Are you getting slammed by snow out there in New York?
No, there's no snow, just chill. It's about 22 degrees and sunny skies and about a 14-mile-an-hour wind, which kind of makes it feel really cold.
Well, at least you're not getting slammed like Buffalo. I know you're on a trip out to New York right now. You're based in Omaha, Nebraska now, right?
Correct, yeah.
Great. Well, I hope you're enjoying your trip out there, and I hope the snow stays away. Well, Jim, before we get started, let me tell our listeners a little more about you. James D. Best is the author of the Steve Dancy series of Westerns, including his latest, Jenny's Revenge, scheduled for release in February. The other books in this series are The Shopkeeper, Leadville, Murder at Thumb Butte, and The Return. Jim sold more than 70,000 copies of his books to date, which includes a few one-off titles in addition to his extremely popular Westerns. These titles include The Shutmouse Society, Tempest at Dawn, and Principled Action. So let me start today's call by asking our audience, how would you like to sell 1,000 copies of your book during the upcoming holiday season? I know I would. Now, Jim published the first Steve Dancy tale, The Shopkeeper, back in 2007. Back in the late aughts, as they say. He was pretty much an unknown at the time, having published only one book previously, and that was the digital organization published by Wiley. The Shopkeeper was his first published fiction. Now, I remember that his book sold reasonably well at launch, but his initial sales tapered off after a bit, and that's just simply because he reached the end of his existing platform. Now, most authors give up at this point, figuring they've sold as many as they're going to. That's a huge mistake. And not Jim, though, of course. He went to work, and by the following Christmas, he'd sold nearly 1,000 copies of his book during a single holiday season. Now, while that may seem like small potatoes to him now, remember he sold more than 70,000 copies in total to date. At the time, it was a significant accomplishment. After all, you can't sell 70,000 copies without first selling 1,000. So today we're going to learn some of the techniques and tactics Jim used to sell those early 1,000 copies. He'll also bring us up to date a little bit on his current marketing mix and how his marketing program has changed over time. Now, I've made Jim promise to give us the straight dope on how he does it. So let's get those pens, pencils, phones, or tablets ready to take notes and jump right into today's call. Now, Jim, why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your background? When did you first get bitten by the writing bug?
Oh, I wrote nonfiction journal articles. I wrote a couple magazine columns, all on computing. So I wrote pretty much my entire professional career in the computing industry, all nonfiction, all very technical. And then I started consulting, and I was spending a lot of time in a hotel room, and I just thought I'd try my hand at fiction and start off with Tempest at Dawn. Actually, it was one of the later ones published, but that was actually my first novel I wrote, and it was pretty close to nonfiction as well. And then when I finished that, I wrote the first Western, The Shopkeeper. And I had a New York agent at the time, and I sent it to him, and he said he liked it, but that the advance on a Western wouldn't even make a decent down payment on a small Korean car. So he declined to represent it. In other words, it wasn't worth his time. And that's when I did a lot of research on self-publishing and ended up going with Wheatmark with that first book in 2007, and haven't regretted it ever since.
Well, that's great. And certainly we haven't regretted it either, since you've been just so successful with your projects. So now, prior to publishing with Wheatmark, though, you had published a book with Wiley. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and why you ultimately decided to go indie? Because even if your agent, decided he wasn't going to rep it, you could have still held out and maybe tried to do some querying on your own, or maybe get another agent. Just tell us a little bit more about your experience publishing that book with Wiley.
Okay, well, the first book with Wiley was called A Digital Organization. I objected strongly to the title. The title I had picked was Dinosaurs and Whippersnappers. And the reason, it was a book not on technology so much as how to manage technologists. And, of course, Dinosaurs and Whippersnappers, you always have the conflict in technology against the people who make a living with the older technology and the people pushing the new stuff. And Wiley told me that they had focus grouped the word digital, and any book with the word digital in it sold well. So I guess I proved their focus group wrong, because that book didn't sell too well. I mean, it finally sold out its first printing, and it's actually still made available by Wiley as a Kindle book. But it wasn't just that. I had chapters in it on different types of technology, and I was told I had to delete them because they published other books that addressed the same thing. And I just found I had no control over the book publishing through a New York publisher. So the big advantage and the biggest disadvantage of self-publishing is that you get complete control, and the disadvantage, of course, is you have complete control. It's all your fault if things don't go well. No one else to blame. And but I've found that I much prefer to be able to do things the way I think is going to work and will address the audience I'm trying to reach, rather than what an editor at a major publisher thinks. And the irony is that the chapter titled Dinosaurs and Whippersnappers, which was in the book, is the only chapter that is currently referenced in academia, is actually signed in a couple of universities as a class of management.
Well, it's funny. Well, I got to, just from my perspective, Dinosaurs and Whippersnappers is a superior title on so many levels. The digital organization doesn't really get your mind thinking at all, whereas Dinosaurs and Whippersnappers is such a great phrase. So, I'm sorry that they made that choice. I think it was a mistake. But, they're lost. So, speaking of target audience, who's the target audience for the Steve Dancy series? Now we're shifting gears and talking about your Westerns, of which you're about to release number 5 in the series.
The audience, I thought, was going to be in older men, quite frankly, people who grew up with Westerns in the 50s, and that has not been the case. Well over 50% of the reviews, and I think the Shopkeeper has 180 now on Amazon, are written by women. And I know that it got a start because somehow it took off with nurses. And I suspect nurses on third shift. But there were a lot of nursing books that were in the also sold early days with the Shopkeeper. So that might have been part of the start, but I'm not sure what the appeal, and I certainly wasn't trying to write a book appealing to women. But since I buy the majority of books, I'm glad it does. So my audience is also the older men, and that gets very specific to the holiday period on how I try and sell the book as well. But it also seems to have a broader appeal to younger people, and those younger people seem to be mostly female.
Interesting. So you touched on something that I want to just go back to real quick. You said that during the holiday season that idea of older men as an audience that you really zero in on. Can you share a little bit about how you do that?
Yes. This used to be fairly simple back when these were first coming out, the series. And that is, I would push on my blog, on my email campaigns, and I would tweet and other things, pushing the concept of giving a book to your father or grandfather that would be a Western. And books were very popular gifts at that time. They're still not as popular now, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But I sold a lot of books as gifts, and I had a couple of really good reviews early on that had a lot of helpful votes, which kept it toward the top. And if you go to the shopkeeper, it's still, I think, the one with the highest number of votes, which said that they gave this to their father on Christmas, and he was so thrilled with it that they've been giving them to him ever since, the follow-on series. And so that's knowing who your audience is, and at least at Christmas time, I push hard on the give the book as a Christmas gift. Nowadays, actually, I think gift cards are more popular than giving books. And what I find is that about a week prior to Christmas, because I think people send the Amazon gift cards prior to Christmas, I start seeing e-book sales take off. And then e-book sales, it used to be I aim to sell as many books as possible prior to the holidays as gifts. And now, about a week before Christmas, I change the emphasis and push e-books. And through January and February, people either got new Kindles or Nooks and want to load them up with things they want to read, or people already owned them and got gift cards. That's who I try and target.
Fantastic. Well, why don't you take us back, if you can, to when your book was first published? So when The Shopkeeper first came out, what do you remember about those first few months after your pub date, which was, I believe, December 2007?
One of the good things about writing, the whole thing of writing nonfiction and fiction are completely different, and how you market them are completely different. And with fiction, then it's different if you're writing a genre book versus a general literary type. And I have both. But on the genre books, the best thing about it is that enthusiasts, to a large part, find you. So people, when I first put it out, who liked Westerns, they found me, and I didn't have to do much. And then, I think as you mentioned in the introductory comments, there was a decent sales, and then they started to taper. And what I did then is I ran a small ad in True West for 3 months, because they gave a discount if you went 3 months. And I timed it so that those ads were leading right up into the Christmas buying season. I also had, I actually distributed about 2,500 cards and bookmarks. So you could tell every place I went, and I traveled a lot, especially back then when I was consulting. And I would just leave cookie crumbs every place I went, or these 3x5 cards, which if you wait for Staples to run a sale on their business cards, and you design a card promoting your book, not a business card, but a card promoting your book, you can get those down to about 3.5 cents a copy if you wait for the Staples sale. And then, you can feel pretty free about leaving those around. And then at that time, I put up 2 websites, one on me, trying to brand myself as an author, then a second one for Steve Dancy, trying to brand the character in the series. And then I also had an author's blog, and in the author's blog is where I would push giving books as Christmas gifts and pushing Kindle sales after Christmas, that kind of thing. And then, like every author should, I kept an email list, and people who would write me about the books, positively or negatively, I kept all their email addresses. I would put out campaigns to them. About that time, I didn't think it was that long ago, but it ends up it was. I put up the first book trailer on YouTube. Not sure how much effect that had. but I think at that early date, book trailers were kind of unique and did help. And then I went around to independent bookstores, and I got 8 of them to carry the book. They were local in the Phoenix area. And, messed around with some internet communities, that kind of thing. And then I did something else that I don't think paid off that year, but I think paid off later, was I sent a lot of packages to a group called Books for Soldiers. So I would send gift items along with my books to soldiers, and I was told that that was very effective because after they read the book, then they hand it to someone else, and you can get a dozen people to have read your book. And then, of course, they write back, and when they return, hopefully talk you up. And then I left copies of the book in, like, I was on a ship cruise, and I left one in the library of the ship. And in other places, I would only leave copies where people would use them temporarily or maybe see them. So those are the kind of things I did that may have worked at different levels. It's hard to tell which one worked the best, but I suspect the advertising just before Christmas did, for those people who can afford it.
Yeah. Now, it wasn't until the following year, though, after your book came out, that you were able to generate those 1,000 sales in a single holiday season. And this is a concept I really want to highlight. So, number one, you just gave about 6 or 7 things that you did, and they included advertising, leaving books in different places. I love the idea of sending gift packages that included books to soldiers. That's a really very clever idea because when people are serving overseas, they've got often a lot of time and not a whole lot to do. It's a tough life serving overseas, and getting a chance to maybe read a Western that reminds them a little bit of home even might help a lot with folks who are over there. So that's a really interesting idea. Now, the key concept I want to highlight, though, is that it really took you months of effort before you started to see that significant uptick in sales. Because I remember in those early months of 2008, they were just pretty much down to a trickle. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about, what was your mindset when you started going into doing these activities? Did you ever face that kind of dark moment where you thought, gosh, this is just not going to work? Or take us through that period just a little bit.
Okay, well, first off, what I did is I drug out the original presentation I made, in fact, to the Arizona publishers. And these were the things I was doing prior to that ramp-up. But I think the realization that really kept me motivated was if you publish in the traditional format, what you're going to do is you're going to go into bookstores, and the publishers are very good at creating a lot of hoopla on the introduction of a book. And the reason for that is a bookstore will buy copies of it, and the next thing they're going to do is buy the next book. And one of the things I discovered with the digital organization is when that book was first published, every Barnes & Noble and every Borders bought 2 copies, and I was thrilled. In fact, the publisher was even thrilled. But I discovered something is when those 2 copies are sold, they don't order again. They go on to the next released book. So just because you get into a bookstore doesn't really have any long legs on it. And but if you are selling a self-published book and your primary marketplace is Barnes & Noble for the Nook or Amazon, then you have no shelf life. You aren't getting kicked off the shelf by the next new book that comes out. You stay there forever. And that changes the whole marketing approach from kind of the Big Bang Theory to the long perseverance, just keep building the brand and keep getting your name out in front of the readers and then turning your readers into your sales force so that more and more readers who read your book are telling other people. In fact, I have a theory that you don't really want fans, you want a sales force. So fans are great, but the ones who tell their friends are also buy the book. This is a good book I read. That's the best thing you can have. And I still think that in publishing, whether it's traditional or self-published, word of mouth is still the strongest sales technique there is.
Do you have any tips for attracting those kinds of people, the Salesforce type people, as opposed to just the fans, or do you just kind of, some of them come with that behavior and some don't?
Yeah, I do have one tip. Is the ones who write you are most likely going to be talking to other people. So if you get an email, first off, I don't keep my email address secret. I plaster it every place I can. And if somebody takes the time to write you an email note telling you how much you like your book, or asking you a question about maybe the plot or something like that, and I've had people who have criticized me because I had one of the ERPs in Prescott, Arizona in 1880, or 1881, January of 1881, and they left Prescott in December of 80. And so we're talking 60 days, and I just wrote back and said that fiction authors have unlimited powers, including the power to bend time. And he wrote back again, and we had a little bit of a conversation. But those people, whoever writes you, those are the ones who are most likely, because they've already shown an inclination. So you want to try and generate a little bit of a conversation, or at least respond to every one of those notes.
Great tip. Now, are there any activities that you did during this period that you remember specifically? And sometimes it's hard to know exactly what delivered X number of sales versus Y. But were there any activities that you felt like they just didn't work at all?
Didn't work at all. Yeah, I have lots of them that didn't work at all. I was part of the Amazon Associates. That didn't work. I got involved in some contests. Never had anything work well there. I tried Google AdWords, complete bust. I tried to get traditional media to do reviews of the book, and I have actually received quite a few reviews by newspapers and some magazines, but none of them that I tried to prompt. All of them that happened were kind of surreptitious or serendipity. They just happened, and they weren't any pushing by me. I tried to get involved in Western-themed organizations, and didn't find any of them worked out that well. And I also tried to write articles for Western-themed magazines and stuff like that, and solicit or made queries on writing articles, and nothing worked there. And there were a few other things I tried that just didn't seem to work too well. I did write some articles and put them in on the online article. I can't even remember the name of it.
Like e-zine articles or something like that?
Yes, right, e-zine. And I've had thousands of hits on them. So I know that they work, but it's over time and it's a very slow process. But it helps build credibility. I think it's a very powerful tool for nonfiction writers, though, where you have an expertise that you're trying to promote, and putting together some articles that build on that expertise, I think is a very powerful way to get people to go on beyond the article and actually purchase the book.
But you find that even writing fiction, that you've had some success with that approach.
Yes, it's just slower, and they say that nonfiction is all about credentials, and fiction is about your base or your the number of readers that you have. And so, if fiction is based on building an audience, that takes a long time to build an audience. For instance, if you get someone to read your book, it may take them several weeks to read your book, and then many more weeks before they come back and pick up the next one. So it's a long process building an audience, and that's what I was talking about earlier, is that's an advantage of self-publishing, is that you don't have a shelf life, and you can persevere and just keep steady pressure on getting your name and your books out there, and eventually you build up some momentum, and it can then pick up on itself.
Well, it's hard to believe, but back in 2007, I don't think Wheatmark even published ebooks, and I know that when the first Steve Dancy novel came out, The Shopkeeper, that wasn't immediately available in ebook, but I know that ebooks now have obviously started to become very popular out there. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about how popular ebook sales are to your titles now.
And you were talking about 2008 when I hit 1,000 books in December. I look back at my records. I sold 2 Kindle copies of The Shopkeeper that month. That's
amazing.
So 2 out of the and that was above 1,000. But so it was. I think the Kindle came out about 2007, but it was not a marketplace to chase or go after at all. Nowadays, most of my sales are Kindle sales. In fact, if I look at Kindle sales today, I got 41,000 copies sold on Kindle and 21,000 of the Wheatmark printed versions, and then the rest are large print or audio or Nook sales. And the other thing that I'll just mention as a quick aside before I forget, that I've noticed recently that Nook is making headway against Kindle, and my Barnes & Noble sales are surprisingly strong compared to what they used to be a couple years ago. So somewhere Barnes & Noble is getting the Nook moving in a pretty positive direction. Might be their website, I'm not sure.
That's interesting, because it's been in the news about how, probably a year ago, about how they were gutting that division. So that's great news. I think it's really critical for Amazon to have a competitor to make them innovate and not, there's a lot of price manipulation, things like that, monopoly tactics that Amazon uses. So that's never good for business, in my opinion. So I'm really glad to hear that. Now, one of the things that people will absolutely kill me if I don't ask you this question. What are your thoughts about pricing of ebooks?
Oh, boy. That's a really difficult question. I wish I had a good answer. I have moved the prices around on my books quite a bit. I'm a little concerned that Amazon is driving the price down. No, I'm more than a little concerned. I'm concerned. I have The Shopkeeper, which is the first in the series, priced at $2.99. And the rest of the books are priced at $4.99, which is actually a little bit high for the genre. But if I can pull them in with The Shopkeeper, I found that it doesn't seem to make much difference whether it's $1 cheaper or not for the follow-on books. If people like the first one, they'll go on. Now, right at the moment, I'm talking about the 3 days right now. I'm running Leadville at 99 cents. And about once a month, I'll do about a 3-day promotion of one of the books in the series at 99 cents. And that seems to help boost the entire sales for some reason for the whole series. Just to give you an example, today on Barnes & Noble, I've sold 2 Murder at Thumb Butte, which this is all part of the series, 2 of The Return, 1 of The Shopkeeper, and 11 of Leadville. The other 3 books are at full price, and Leadville's at 99 cents. So obviously Leadville has caused the other books in the series to sell a little bit better than I would normally expect on Barnes & Noble. And then the numbers are bigger, but a similar type of impact on the Kindle versions. And before I forget, I would like to mention one thing. One of things I always blog about at Christmas. Well, there's a couple things I do at Christmas. Can I go ahead and talk about that?
Please, absolutely.
Okay, the first thing is every year before Thanksgiving, which gives all listeners another week, I go through all of my author pages on all the online sellers and all of my product pages for each of my books on all the sellers. And I make sure that they're up to date. Any reviews I got during the year, if I haven't remembered to add them, and I tweak them wherever they need to be tweaked. But it's kind of like my annual house cleaning, making sure that going into the Christmas shopping season, I'm presenting the best face forward that I can. There's another thing on Amazon which is called the Kindle Matchbook program. And there, if you buy one of the hard copies, a printed version, then you can set your book up to sell at a steep discount for the Kindle version. So I have set all my books up to sell for 99 cents on the Kindle version. And then probably right after Thanksgiving, I'll write a blog article about how it's kind of like regifting. You can any book that you would like to have as your own on your Kindle, you can buy the hard copy as a gift, and then pick up the Kindle version for yourself for 99 cents. And I usually don't promote my books specifically, except that I have a promo at the bottom of the article promoting my books. But I try and make it more general and try and make it lighthearted, and a little bit humorous as a way to promote books. So those are a couple of things I do right around the Christmas period as well. But
those are
really what
great tips.
Me.
That's okay. I mean, that was such a valuable tip that everyone, including me, is sitting there taking notes right now and writing it down. That's a fantastic tip. I mean, when I first heard about the Kindle Matchbook program, my feeling was, isn't that nice? They're making it easy for people to get the book in a different format. But, I really hadn't made the leap that you could give the physical book to somebody, and then keep the Kindle book for yourself. That's a very clever way of promoting it and positioning it in people's minds. So
also do that at Father's Day.
Yeah, that's smart too, because that folks are buying it for their fathers, but then if they're a nurse, they're going to read it themselves. If they're, in this case, the
right.
female nurse, they'll be, that they're just, they're guaranteed to buy the book for themselves. Well, that is really fantastic. Now, one of the things you just mentioned, of course, is that you are blogging on your site, jamestbest.blogspot.com. Are you maintaining the 3 websites you mentioned earlier on the call, or where's the majority of your web activity these days?
Good question. I still have the website is still up, and to be honest with you, I lost it got corrupted and I can't update it, so I either have to rebuild it or just leave it alone. So I just left it alone and it's up there. But I do everything now on the blog. I just think that Blogspot gives me all the capability I need, and I found that I can talk about things that don't work and do work. I used to write about 4 or 5 postings a week. In other words, almost daily, and I saw no sales improvement whatsoever. So now I write one more lengthily posting a week. Usually I try to aim on Mondays. There's no reason for that, by the way, other than I usually write on the weekend. And I find that works just as well, although the number of hits I'm getting on the blog site have decreased, but I didn't see any increase. If the objective was to sell books, I didn't see a lot of book sales from the blog. In fact, I don't have any proof of this, but I believe the people who are reading the blog are people who have already read my books. In other words, they come to the blog site after reading the books. They aren't driven to buy the books from reading the blogs. Does that make sense?
Well, that's interesting, but do you think that perhaps that these are the people who might be telling their friends about your work?
Yes, and that's why I continue to work on the blog and try and put things out there, and I try not to be selling constantly on it. I try and write articles that I think readers would find interesting or humorous, and I talk about everything from surfing to whatever. But yeah, I do believe that the reason you want to keep a blog up is to take that fans and remind them to go ahead and help promote your books and tell their friends. And especially this is true. I consider, by the way, word of mouth to include things like Goodreads and book clubs and things that most people wouldn't think, not just one-on-one, but other ways that people tell friends and acquaintances about your books. But I would like, I don't think I've mentioned that one of the things I do before Christmas, and I did especially back in the period you're talking about, was write a lot of reviews. And if I have reviews of other books, and I try and write reviews of books in the genre, and then find some way, and back then, you used to be able to put a signature on your reviews, and I used to have James D. Best, author. And nowadays, since so many people are writing and so many people use that technique to push books, I actually think it's a negative, so I remove the author part and just my name, and then I try and write something that's insightful, and I try and anything I read, I try and write a review of it, but I'll hold them off till it gets closer to Christmas. And the reason is that if it's a popular book, the review is going to get shoved down the stack so fast that people won't notice it. And so you want to do it at the point in time when people will be shopping for books. And then if unless you can get a lot of votes, that it was a good review. But I think the main thing is to write something that really is going to make the reader stand up and say, who is this guy who wrote this review? And that means...
Any tips about about how to create a review that's going to get people to do that? Well,
one of the things that'll do it, and I'm not promoting this, but is to take something that's very popular and write a negative review on it. And I have done that with some books that I thought were highly overrated, and that gets you a lot of flaming back, and some people can't take that. But I'll tell you what, it gets a lot of. It's a way to get noticed. But one of the things you probably don't want to do is I wrote a bad review of a John Wayne movie one time, and I thought I was never going to recover from that. So don't knock the Duke.
Well, I would imagine too that in your genre, the Duke is basically, he's the king. Well, he's the Duke. So I mean, that's a very controversial thing to do. Even though I've seen many John Wayne movies, and not all of them are tops. Some of them are absolute works of art, but others are, only so-so. So don't knock the Duke.
Right. I didn't actually write a bad review. In fact, I think the last comment was that this movie proves that John Wayne can't carry a movie all by himself.
So it actually was favorable for the Duke.
Yeah, it was favorable for him, but it's still, I took a lot of flack for that. The other thing is I try and figure out some way to tie the book into another book. Not my book, but if you can write a review of say, what normally is called a chase novel, and tie it into a Ludlum, who I believe invented the concept of that particular type plot, and then you can add a link to the Ludlum book, so you're not promoting yourself so much, but you're doing something that gives the reader information, and it says, well, if you like this book, here's another one, and here's some similarities to it, and it gives them a link right to it, and then what you hope is they click on your name as well and see that you also are writing books.
Well, I have two follow-up questions about this. And actually, the first thing I wanted to comment is I believe you're referring to the Jason Bourne novels, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
I call
anybody who hasn't read Robert Ludlow, Right. Anybody who hasn't read Robert Ludlow, the Bourne novels, the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Supremacy, et cetera, which have been turned into a series of very popular movies. But this prompted a question in my mind that I think is really critical to ask you, which is, how important do you think it is to write a series?
Extremely important. And when we sold 1,000 print copies, I've done as well with counting Kindles, but the year that we sold 1,000 print copies in December, I had 2 books out. They weren't part of a series. But as I mentioned earlier, that I'm promoting one of the books of 4 books in the series today, and I'm selling other copies in the series. And I think I can't overemphasize. In fact, I only will write Steve Dancy books now. I've learned my lesson. The other books have sold decently, but without some way to tie them together, or one of them I was on a TV show and it sold very well for a short period. But without something like that going on, you need a series and you need the books to promote them each other, and that allows you to add a chapter of the next book in the series at the end of each book, and there's lots of other ways that you can promote a book in a series. And I'm surprised when I run the 99-cent sales how frequently people will buy all 4 books in the series, even though the others are full price, all at once, before they've even had a chance that I can't imagine they had a chance to read the first one yet. So series are very important, and I think that if you're looking for a long-term, growth in sales, and I think this is true also, by the way, for nonfiction. If you have an expertise and you get a book going and then you do seminars or whatever on that nonfiction book, then having a follow-on book to that can be very powerful on establishing your brand and your position as an authority on that area.
Well, I think that's a great tip. And just to give an example, I think of Seth Godin, who writes, or Malcolm Gladwell, both of whom write, Seth Godin, marketing books that have kind of interesting, provocative titles. Typically, the content of his books is pretty brief. He often uses his blog as his platform for developing his ideas, and it's really just more or less one idea that he wants to share. He elaborates on it a little bit, and that's that. Same thing with Malcolm Gladwell. He does a lot of research on his topics, likes to look at the world from a certain perspective, kind of things that you didn't expect about things that we see every day or facts that happen. But what's interesting is all of his books are titled very similarly in terms of their their cadence. And one of my favorite things is this website called the Malcolm Gladwell Title Generator, where basically it just randomly assigns titles to books based on just kind of his style of creating those books. But both those guys have made really successful careers on using that idea. But I think I want to just highlight and just take a step back for a moment for all of our listeners to really comment on some of the points that Jim has made that I think are so critical. So what happens is when you write a series is that, first of all, there are people who read in that niche a lot. So there's a couple of good advantages to that. People who read Westerns, they try to, in many cases, if they're really a fan of that genre, they're going to read all the Westerns, or at least all the good Westerns. And in many cases, they might read all the bad Westerns as well. Number 2, they will recommend the good Westerns to their friends. Number 3, they will criticize the bad Westerns as well. They'll have very strong opinions. And so in a way, these people are, as Jim was saying, these are the sales force. These are the people who are passionate about this, whether they themselves write or not. But naturally, one of the smart things you can do as an author writing this, which is you should be reading deeply in that niche and commenting, writing reviews. And maybe even, sometimes you say something controversial, that's really positive because it's putting you in the thick of that conversation. And many of these debates are, frankly, from an outsider's perspective, very silly in terms of who's the better Western writer, or, which period of Louis L'Amour's work is the best. And these are all questions that no one can really answer with a definitive answer. There is no definitive period of John Wayne's work that's the best. But it gets people debating and talking, and that's, as an author, that's gold for you. So I just want to really highlight that whole chain of ideas that all came out of writing in a niche, if you're writing fiction, and then keeping to that niche and then going very deep in that niche in terms of how you interest your readers. Now, Jim, one of the things you talked about that I cannot let go from this conversation is social media. You mentioned Goodreads, which is a platform that we talk to our clients about a lot, about how valuable it is since you've got a site full of readers. What has been your experience using social media? Do you recommend it to folks? Do you spend time on it? And if so, do you have any particular favorite sites?
Well, Goodreads is my favorite site because obviously that's where readers go, and I'm trying to find readers. So that's my customers. And when I mentioned book reviews, and I post them both on Goodreads and on Amazon, usually simultaneously. Also, I think Goodreads has the best advertising program out there from a social media standpoint. They only charge per click, and it's a small banner ad, and it's a very reasonable way to get your name and your books in front of people who basically are committed readers. And so I would highly recommend that everybody look into the Goodreads, I think they call it self-advertising program. They do make a few suggestions that I found are, in my opinion, not correct. One is they want you to link to the book page on Goodreads, and I found that it works much better to link directly to the product page on Amazon rather than making them do a two-step. And when you do an ad on Goodreads, it already tells you how many ratings you have from Goodreads followers. So you're already getting the promotional or the opinion of the Goodreads people in the ad. And I think that's a very valuable. Goodreads, I have about a 4.2 average stars on Amazon, and I would guess about a 3.7 on Goodreads. And a lot of writers or authors kind of don't like the fact that Goodreads people don't rate normally as high as people directly on Amazon, but I believe that it's all contextual, that people think that a 3.6 or 3.7 rating is good on Goodreads, and so I do everything I can to work with Goodreads. The ones I work with are Goodreads, Facebook, and Twitter, and Pinterest. And I use the last three to drive traffic to my blog. And I don't drive, although the Goodreads displays the blog as well as Amazon, I don't use it to drive traffic there. Does that answer your question? There's probably lots of other stuff. Oh, anytime I blog anything, I promote it on Tumblr. What's the other one? Just a sec. My memory's not too good. I'm getting old, I think. Stumbled Upon. Right. And I found those. Yeah, I found those are pretty good sites to drive traffic into the blog.
Great. Well, Jim, one of the things that you mentioned throughout this call is just the sheer amount of things that you're doing. You're doing so many things that sometimes you can't remember the names of the things that you're doing. How much time do you spend marketing? You're also writing these books. I mean, you've got, I think, this is your fifth Steve Dancy novel that's coming out, right? Jenny's Revenge?
Right.
And you've got 3 other titles, I believe, that you publish with us. So you're talking about 8, 9 books here at this point. So you spend a lot of time writing, obviously, right? And you've ghostwritten books as well. So how much time are you spending marketing?
More than I would like to, but I try and spend probably the first hour of the day doing whatever promotion I'm going to do. Just 1 second. I had somebody at the door. I'm in a hotel. So I spend about an hour a day in the morning, and then I try and go right into writing, and then for me, I can't write more than maybe 4 to 5 hours a day. I mean, that would be a full day for me. And writing a couple hours a day sometimes is all I get in, depending on what other activities I got. So I try and limit the amount of time I spend marketing, and it's a difficult thing because you can get enmeshed in this, and then also if you're in a part of the book you're writing that's you aren't quite sure how you're going to proceed from there, it's real easy to procrastinate by messing around on internet sites. So I try and discipline myself a little bit.
A little bit of marketing avoidance, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, I'm sure all of us, well, some folks on the line I'm sure can relate to when I was working as a full-time writer that my house was as clean as it will ever be. Just the temptation to straighten things up and really do anything to avoid sitting down and tackling a tough scene or a tough chapter is strong in writers. Well, Jim, any famous last words you'd like to share with our audience? You have so much of value to share, and we really just touched on the surface of some of the wisdom you've gained over the years as a marketer, as an author, but your numbers speak for themselves, and I know that there's at least 3 major points from this call that for a lot of folks are going to be brand new that they've never thought of before and will really, really help them moving forward. Any famous last words you'd like to share? Words of wisdom, it could be whatever you like.
Well, the first thing is that if you want fans and you want your readers to be salesperson people, the first thing you got to do is you got to write a good book. You got to write something that people want to talk about, and that means you have to expend some resources for editing, proofreading, good cover design. Every element of the book has to be professional. It has to be something that satisfies your audience. So you can't slough off on some of the things that some people want to do. In fact, what I tell people, and I've blogged about this, is if you can't afford to do it right, to publish a book properly, then I think you should go the traditional publishing route. In other words, write the query letters and try and get a regular publisher or an agent, because you're not going to be successful if you put out a shoddy product or a half-done, I shouldn't say shoddy product, a half-done product that needs the nip and tuck that a professional can apply to it. And then I'll give you my number one rule of marketing, which is if you do nothing, nothing happens. So I do a lot, and sometimes I don't know what works and what doesn't work. But I have, if I get heavy into getting a book published, or I travel for a long period, or I just get lazy and I let the marketing go, I can see that this rule really holds, that if you do nothing, nothing happens. So and one of the things that you need to do if you're in the book business, and I'm remiss on this right now, is you need to keep coming out with books, especially if they're in a series. And that does a couple of things. Number one is it gets your audience, it meets their needs. But second is I don't think anything invigorates an author to do the marketing and to get busy than to have a newly published book. And so I do think, not just doing a book and moving on is writing more than one book, and it's good for you and it's good for your audience.
Well, fantastic stuff, Jim. I really, really appreciate it. How can people find out more about you? If you could just maybe give out your blog site again, or the link, if you can explain the link to your Amazon page, whatever you prefer.
Well, my Amazon page is under James D. Best, of course, and the blog is James D. Best, and people sometimes forget the D, at .blogspot.com. So jamesdbest.blogspot.
That's right. So JamesDBest.blogspot.com.
Correct. Or you can just Google James D. Best, and one of the first things that's going to come up, because I have so many entries, is going to be the Blogspot. Or you can go to the author page on either Barnes & Noble or Amazon. And I would tell everyone that having a blog, one of the things it does is that blog gets also displayed on the Amazon author page, and so you're getting almost automatically, or no, it is automatic. You got to register it, but so you can get a lot more visibility that way.
Fantastic. And for everyone on the call, don't forget, if you are an older gentleman or a younger nurse, then these books make absolutely great gifts for the holiday season. But truth be told, I've read them. They're great books, very entertaining. Jim is really working in this genre and really getting it nailed down as each book comes out. So I highly recommend them to everyone. Jim, we're so grateful for taking this time to share your expertise and your experience with us today. We really appreciate it. It's hard to imagine, but we've known each other for a number of years, and I still learn new things today. So I just can't thank you enough for taking the time. Well, listen, thanks everyone so much for attending today's call. We will send you the recording if you are an Authors Academy member later to review. I know I'm going to actually be reviewing this call myself because there's just so much high-quality information that Jim shared that I want to make sure to communicate with our clients and authors who I meet in the future. So, Jim, thanks a million.
Okay, thank you for having me.
All right, enjoy the rest of your time in New York and stay warm, okay?
Yeah, okay.
All right, take care, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.